So, Bob, we've talked a lot about how to screen adults, how to go through that process, and you've alluded to ways to help or prepare kids for this process, and I want you to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that.
Right. You know, Joel, in the past, we just didn't want to believe victims. Not until the Me Too movement came along 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever, did we start to believe victims. And that led us to thinking is how can we give our children that are in children's ministry, that are in those programs, how can we give them license or how can we give them agency to speak up if they ever feel that they're being touched inappropriately or talked to inappropriately or treated inappropriately. And we really came to the conclusion that, and this really is nationwide, is we need to shine a light on this beyond the congregation. We need to educate the children in our church and our churches on what abuse is. Not just physical abuse or sexual abuse, what's psychological abuse, bullying, abuse, those types of things. So we didn't want to just focus on the sexual side, but that's what I'm going to talk about now. Our senior pastor would do a sermon series periodically on what are the values of our church. Who are we at Christ Church of the Valley? What are the values? What do we live by? What do we feel God wants us to do in this church? And we would walk through that. And in that process, we would talk about our keeping kids safe, but how we're going to educate our kids as well, how we're going to help the kids shine a spotlight on this. And that is just by talking about it and talking about it in an age appropriate sense. Now, there are lots and lots of materials out there that are available at no cost that you can gather off the internet and use to talk to your children about inappropriate behavior, inappropriate touching, inappropriate conversations. And one of the places where you can go is Ministry Safe. Uh, uh, Greg Love and Kimberly Norris are the two attorneys, husband and wife, that started Ministry Safe, and they have one of the best programs out there. But Kim had done a series of articles for USA Today, the newspaper, in the past on how to talk to your kids about sexual abuse early and often. And she has really good pointers and conversation techniques to do that are age appropriate. And you can find those online probably somewhere, and certainly with USA Today archives. And it's really, really good stuff. I've read it many times, and I've thought this really works well. One of the things we do, and I'm going to reach down and get something, it's called the Stay Safe program. And this was put together by Kennecott Camps in Missouri. I don't know if you've ever heard of Kennecott Camps, not that you should have. It's a large Christian camp operation in Missouri. They do a great job. We at Brotherhood partner with them for several years to put together materials. And one of the materials that we wanted to develop was how do we communicate with kids on an ongoing basis? And this is what we came up with. It's called a Stay Safe poster. You can see it has the 3 R's of staying safe: recognize, resist, report. And we put these up where they're kids, bathrooms, children's ministry. But one of the objects of this is to let sexual predators know that if they've come to this church to hunt kids and they see this poster around, they're going to know our kids have been educated on what inappropriate touching, inappropriate conversations. We'll even go so far as to talk about the grooming process with kids and how they predators will try to gain access to them, and that they should always tell their parents. So there's an age appropriate process here when you're talking to 3rd graders or 5th graders or 8th graders or boys and girls in high school on what that looks like and how to report. And we found that this Stay Safe poster worked really, really well in churches. And we distributed this nationwide in conjunction with Kennecott Camps and found it to be very helpful. There's another version that you can use as well. And these materials are free, and it's basically the same thing. It's just bigger, stands out more prominent. But what this does, it screams a message to those that have come to your church to hunt kids that this church is shining a spotlight on it. I'm going to go to the church down the road that maybe isn't shining a spotlight on it. And that's the sad thing, Joel. We'll never know who went down the road. It's not like we had an idea they were and maybe a predator and now they're gone. We'll never know. We'll never know how good these work, how well they work, how much they keep kids safe. But we do know it does have an impact because now we're finding out years later with churches that have implemented a program like this compared to churches that haven't. And we're finding that this process of educating kids as well as the parents and the whole thing of recognize, resist, report, and the most important thing there being reporting, making sure you tell somebody no matter what, no matter how hard it's going to hurt, you tell and you talk about it and we expose it. So that is how we educated the kids. So combined with our screening process and kids understanding the stay safe process and what that means, and having this information readily available on our website, because that's one of the places sexual predators will start looking for you is on the website. They'll look at your children's ministry. Is there, can I volunteer there? Can I have access to kids? And they get on your website and they see this kind of stuff. They're going to go surf somebody else's website. So we think we have a pretty solid program here to keep kids safe. At least all the tools are there to make that happen. Again, it's up to the culture of the church to implement and how they handle it down the road.
I think of a story, a claim I had of a situation where a youth pastor developed a friendship with a girl in his congregation, and they went out and he ended up drinking with her and then telling stories about how his marriage was failing and having all these sorts of issues. And so I think there's levels to abuse, and obviously it's easy for us to say, hey, if there's some sort of abuse, report it. But there's levels to it. And I think that's where this education process is so important of where is that line inappropriate? When in this relationship is inappropriate? And if you can educate the students and children as much as try to be preventative on who you allow in the front door, I think those two factors are really important.
Where it gets tricky is in youth ministries, your junior high and high school types, and your youth pastors, and just the changing nature of children starting to age into the teenage years and everything that brings with them, the uncertainty that teenagers deal with now today. I just can't imagine what it's like being a teenager today and everything that they have to deal with, just the violence in the world and so forth and so on. Uh, Having policies and procedures in place for your youth staff and volunteers, obvious things like guys don't meet with girls alone, for example, or they don't meet with them alone even if the door is open. No texting between pastors and youth. Now, some would say it's texting that helps keep these kids going. I get that. What's the culture of your church going to say? Culture of our church was no texting, period. And then we find out that a couple of youth pastors had burner phones and they were texting, and we shut it down and terminated them. We're just not going to tolerate it. You have to find your way through that. And it's difficult because these teenage boys and girls need these youth pastors that are in their 20s. They need that ear. They need that shoulder that they can lean on, figuratively speaking, to get through some of the stuff that they're going through. So babysitting that and coming up with policies, procedures, rules, guidelines that everybody can live with, but yet not restrict ministry, that's a tough thing. It's a very, very tough thing. And there's just really no solid answers to that other than the obvious things that we just talked about. So that's where we have to trust. And that's a hard thing to do for us risk managers, is to fall into that last bastion that we have. And that is, well, I'm just going to have to trust them to do the right thing. The stuff that we had put together at Brotherhood Mutual and Kennecook, for example, is all free. We don't ever want to make money off it. We want it to get out there and be available to the parents. So look at the resources that are on the Brotherhood Mutual website. There's lots of them there. And then just do a general Google search out for, keeping children safe and so forth and so on. And you'll find just a ton of materials out there that are really tailored for the church and will work well in the church.